Karen had always dreamed of traveling to Europe, and this summer she finally made it happen. She saved up for months, booked a first-class ticket, and packed her bags with excitement. To Karen, this trip wasn't just about sightseeing. It was about proving to herself and everyone else that she could live the glamorous life she often boasted about on social media. Armed with her designer sunglasses, expensive camera, and an insatiable need to be the center of attention, she landed in London ready to conquer the city. Her itinerary was packed with iconic landmarks: Big Ben, the Tower of London, and of course, Buckingham Palace. On her second day in the city, Karen decided to visit the palace, eager to see the famous changing of the guard ceremony. She had seen pictures online and couldn't wait to capture the moment for her Instagram followers. Dressed in what she considered casual chic, Karen strutted through the streets of London, ignoring the curious glances from locals who found her loud voice and over-the-top outfit a little out of place. When she arrived at Buckingham Palace, the scene was even more breathtaking than she imagined. The grandeur of the building, the perfectly manicured gardens, and the stoic royal guards standing tall near their horses created an atmosphere of awe. Tourists gathered around, snapping photos and whispering in hushed tones so as not to disturb the solemnity of the moment. But Karen wasn't interested in blending in or respecting the quiet reverence of the space. Instead, she pushed her way through the crowd, loudly complaining about how slow people were moving and how unfair it was that she couldn't get closer to the action. "Excuse me, coming through," she barked, shoving past families and couples who had been patiently waiting for hours. Her behavior drew irritated stares, but Karen didn't care. In her mind, she deserved the best spot to take her pictures, no matter what it took to get there. As she edged closer to the front, she noticed one of the royal guards mounted on a beautiful chestnut horse. The guard's uniform was immaculate, his posture unwavering, and the horse stood still as if carved from stone. It was a picture-perfect moment, but there was just one problem. Karen's view was partially blocked by another tourist holding up a selfie stick. Frustration bubbled inside her. She tapped her foot impatiently, muttering under her breath about how ridiculous it was that someone would ruin her shot. When the person didn't move after a few seconds, Karen rolled her eyes dramatically and stepped to the side, scanning the area for a better angle. That's when she spotted a small rock lying on the ground. An idea sparked in her head, an idea that would soon spiral out of control. Without thinking twice, Karen bent down, picked up the rock, and weighed it in her hand. Little did she know, this impulsive decision would change everything, for the worse. With the rock now firmly in her hand, Karen glanced around to see if anyone was paying attention to her. Most people were busy snapping photos or craning their necks to get a better look at the royal guards and their horses. The crowd's focus was elsewhere, giving Karen a false sense of invisibility. She convinced herself that throwing the rock wouldn't cause any real harm. It was just a little pebble, after all. What could possibly go wrong? In her mind, this was her way of getting back at the universe for ruining her perfect photo opportunity. Taking a deep breath, Karen pulled her arm back and hurled the rock toward the horse standing calmly beside one of the mounted guards. The moment the rock left her hand, she felt a strange mix of satisfaction and nervousness. But before she could even process what she had done, chaos erupted. The rock struck the horse's flank with a dull thud, startling the animal instantly. Its ears flattened, its eyes widened, and within seconds, it reared up on its hind legs, neighing loudly in distress. The sudden movement sent shockwaves through the crowd, as people gasped and scrambled to move out of the way. The guard seated atop the horse reacted quickly, gripping the reins tightly and doing his best to calm the frightened animal. His training kicked in, and despite the unexpected commotion, he managed to regain control after a tense few moments. But the damage had already been done. The once peaceful atmosphere was shattered, replaced by murmurs of disbelief and outrage. Parents clutched their children closer, while others stared in stunned silence at the scene unfolding before them. It didn't take long for the crowd to realize what had caused the disturbance. Several witnesses pointed accusingly at Karen, whose face turned pale as dozens of eyes locked onto her. She threw something. Someone shouted, their voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Within seconds, angry voices surrounded her, demanding answers and condemning her reckless behavior. A man nearby yelled, "How could you do that? That's an innocent animal." Another woman added, "This is disgusting. You don't deserve to be here." Karen, realizing she was cornered, tried to play it off as a misunderstanding. It was just a joke, she stammered, holding her hands up defensively. But her weak excuse only fueled the growing anger. People began filming her on their phones, capturing every word and expression. Some called her actions cruel, while others accused her of being disrespectful not only to the horse, but also to the guard and the traditions of the ceremony. One bystander even noted aloud that the guard happened to be black, sparking whispers among the crowd about whether Karen's actions were racially motivated. As the tension escalated, security personnel stationed nearby rushed over to intervene. They formed a barrier between Karen and the furious onlookers, who were now shouting insults and calling for consequences. Karen, visibly shaken, tried to explain herself, but her words fell on deaf ears. Her attempts to justify her actions only made things worse, as many saw her defensiveness as proof of her lack of remorse. By the time the guards escorted her away from the scene, videos of the incident were already spreading like wildfire online, ensuring that Karen's name and her face would soon become infamous worldwide. As the security guards led Karen away from the chaotic scene, her mind raced with a mix of panic and disbelief. She couldn't believe how quickly everything had spiraled out of control. Just moments ago, she thought throwing the rock would be a harmless way to vent her frustration. Now she found herself at the center of a storm, surrounded by angry faces and harsh words. Her initial confidence began to crumble as reality set in. She was in serious trouble. The guards escorted her to a nearby security office within the palace grounds, where they asked her to sit down and explain herself. Karen tried to act calm, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't mean any harm," she insisted, repeating the same excuse she'd given to the crowd. "It was just a small rock. I didn't think it would upset the horse like that." But her explanation sounded hollow even to her own ears. The stern expressions on the guards' faces told her they weren't buying it. Meanwhile, outside the security office, the crowd continued to buzz with outrage. People gathered in small groups, discussing what they had witnessed. Some shared their footage of the incident on social media, while others called local authorities to report the tourists' behavior. Within minutes, hashtags like #BookingHimPalaceIncident and #RespectTourGuards began trending online. Videos of Karen throwing the rock and the horse rearing up in distress were viewed thousands of times, sparking widespread condemnation. Comment sections filled with angry messages, criticizing not only her actions, but also her apparent lack of remorse. Back inside the office, Karen overheard snippets of radio chatter between the guards and higher-ups. It became clear that this wasn't going to end with a simple warning or apology. The situation was escalating, and officials were treating it as a serious matter. One of the guards informed her that animal cruelty charges could be filed, given the distress caused to the horse. They also mentioned potential penalties for disorderly conduct and trespassing. Hearing these words made Karen's stomach churn. She had never been in legal trouble before, and the thought of facing consequences terrified her. To make matters worse, journalists stationed near Buckingham Palace caught wind of the incident and arrived to cover the story. Cameras flashed as Karen was eventually led out of the security office and into a waiting vehicle. Reporters shouted questions at her, but she kept her head down, refusing to respond. Her attempt to avoid attention only fueled more speculation, with some labeling her as arrogant and unapologetic. Photographs of her being taken away circulated online almost immediately, further cementing her image as the villain of the day. By the time Karen reached the police station, news of the incident had spread far beyond London. International headlines picked up the story. painting her as a reckless tourist who disrespected one of Britain's most cherished traditions. Even Buckingham Palace released a brief statement condemning the act, emphasizing the importance of treating ceremonial duties and the animals involved with respect. For Karen, the weight of the backlash was crushing. She sat alone in a holding cell, replaying the events in her mind and wondering how something so small could have blown up into such a massive ordeal. What started as a careless decision had turned into a life-altering moment. As the hours ticked by, Karen realized there was no turning back. The world now knew her name, and not for the reasons she had hoped. Within hours of the incident, Karen's face was plastered across social media platforms, news websites, and even late-night talk shows. The video of her throwing the rock at the horse had gone viral, and people around the world were quick to share their outrage. What started as a local disturbance near Buckingham Palace quickly turned into a global conversation about respect, privilege, and accountability. For Karen, the backlash was overwhelming. And it was only just beginning. On Twitter, hashtags like #KarenAtBuckingham and #RespectTourGuards dominated the trending list. Memes mocking her behavior flooded timelines, with users creatively editing photos of her to make her look even more out of touch. Some posts highlighted the irony of a tourist disrespecting a country's traditions while visiting it, while others pointed out how her actions reflected broader issues of entitlement and cultural insensitivity. One particularly popular tweet read, "If you can't handle crowds, maybe don't visit one of the busiest landmarks in the world." The comment received thousands of likes and retweets, summing up the frustration many felt toward Karen. Instagram wasn't any kinder. Influencers and travel bloggers who had previously posted glamorous photos of themselves at Buckingham Palace began using their platforms to speak out against Karen's behavior. Many shared educational posts about the history of the royal guards and the significance of the changing of the guard ceremony, emphasizing the importance of respecting such traditions. Others criticized Karen's outfit, noting how her flashy attire seemed out of place at a solemn event meant to honor centuries-old customs. Her attempt to stand out had backfired spectacularly, turning her into a symbol of everything wrong with entitled tourists. YouTube creators wasted no time jumping on the story either. Within 24 hours, countless reaction videos analyzing the incident popped up online. Some creators focused on dissecting Karen's body language and tone during the confrontation, pointing out how her defensive attitude came across as dismissive and self-centered. Others used the opportunity to discuss larger societal issues, such as racism and classism, especially after viewers noted that the guard she disrupted happened to be black. While some argued that her actions weren't racially motivated, others believed they highlighted unconscious biases, often displayed by individuals like Karen. Mainstream media outlets picked up the story too, airing segments on morning shows and nightly news programs. Anchors debated whether Karen's behavior was an isolated act of recklessness or part of a pattern of entitlement. Footage of her yelling at security, "Do you know who I am?" became a focal point of these discussions, with commentators labeling her remarks as classic examples of privilege. Even late-night comedians got in on the action, dedicating entire monologues to making fun of her. One comedian joked, she thought she was auditioning for a role in Game of Thrones, but instead, she ended up starring in How to Lose Friends and Alienate People. The public outrage extended beyond the internet and TV screens. In London, locals expressed their anger by organizing impromptu protests near Buckingham Palace, holding signs that read "Protect our guards" and "Tourists should be respectful." Some businesses capitalized on the controversy by selling merchandise featuring slogans like "Don't be a Karen" and donating proceeds to animal welfare organizations. It seemed everyone, from ordinary citizens to corporations, wanted to ensure Karen's actions wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. For Karen, the sheer scale of the backlash was paralyzing. Friends sent her screenshots of hateful comments calling her the worst tourist ever, while strangers tagged her personal accounts in cruel memes. Her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, each one delivering another blow to her already fragile state. As the days passed, it became clear that this incident wasn't just a fleeting moment of embarrassment. It was a defining chapter in her life, one that would follow her long after the headlines faded. The legal consequences of Karen's actions began to unfold swiftly, leaving her overwhelmed and unprepared for what lay ahead. After spending a restless night in custody, she was formally charged with multiple offenses, including animal cruelty, disorderly conduct, and trespassing. Each charge carried its own set of penalties, and the weight of them all together was staggering. For someone who had never faced so much as a parking ticket, this was uncharted territory, and it terrified her. At her initial court appearance, Karen stood before a judge who listened intently as prosecutors outlined the case against her. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers eager to catch a glimpse of the infamous tourist. Photographers snapped pictures through the windows, capturing every detail of her disheveled appearance. Gone was the confident woman who strutted through London just days earlier. Now, Karen looked pale, exhausted, and visibly shaken. Her lawyer argued that the incident was an isolated mistake and promised that she would take full responsibility for her actions. But the judge wasn't swayed. Karen was released on bail under strict conditions, including a ban from returning to any royal sites during her stay in the UK. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace issued a formal statement addressing the incident. The palace expressed gratitude for the professionalism displayed by the guard and praised the resilience of the horse involved, emphasizing that both humans and animals deserve respect during ceremonial duties. The statement also highlighted the importance of preserving cultural traditions, urging visitors to approach such events with dignity and awareness. While the words were measured and diplomatic, they served as a clear rebuke of Karen's behavior, further solidifying public opinion against her. Back home, the fallout continued to escalate. News outlets reported that Karen worked as a mid-level manager at a marketing firm, a revelation that sparked outrage among her colleagues and clients. Employees within the company started circulating petitions demanding her termination, arguing that her actions reflected poorly on the organization's reputation. Under mounting pressure, the CEO held an emergency meeting and ultimately decided to fire Karen. In a brief press release, the company stated, "We do not tolerate behavior that disrespects others or harms innocent animals. This individual's actions are not aligned with our values." Karen's personal life crumbled alongside her professional one. Friends and family members distanced themselves from her, embarrassed by the global attention her reckless decision had brought. Some stopped answering her calls, while others outright confronted her, accusing her of ruining their shared vacations and tarnishing their reputations by association. Even her neighbors grew hostile, leaving angry notes on her car and avoiding her whenever she ventured outside. It seemed there was no safe space where she could escape the judgment and disdain. To make matters worse, Karen received countless messages from strangers, some offering harsh criticism, others issuing veiled threats. Her email inbox filled up with hate mail, forcing her to disable notifications altogether. At first, she tried responding to defend herself, but the replies only fueled more backlash. Eventually, she gave up, retreating into isolation as the world continued to vilify her. The once vibrant social media presence she prided herself on was now a ghost town. She deleted her accounts entirely after realizing they had become platforms for ridicule rather than connection. As weeks turned into months, Karen found herself grappling with the reality of her situation. Legal fees piled up, draining her savings, and the stress of the ordeal began to take a toll on her mental health. She attended therapy sessions at the insistence of her remaining loved ones, though she struggled to open up about the depth of her regret. Outside the confines of her therapist's office, however, people remained skeptical of whether her remorse was genuine or merely an attempt to salvage her shattered image. For Karen, the road to redemption, if it even existed, felt impossibly long and uncertain. As the dust began to settle on the whirlwind of legal battles and public humiliation, Karen found herself staring at a life that felt completely unrecognizable. Her once busy days filled with work meetings, social events, and vacations have been replaced by long hours of solitude and self-reflection. The silence in her home was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of her phone buzzing with yet another unpleasant reminder of her past actions. Desperate to regain some semblance of control over her life, Karen decided it was time to take responsibility, not just for the sake of her reputation, but because she knew deep down that she owed it to herself and others. Her first step toward redemption came when she reached out to an animal welfare organization based in London. She sent them a heartfelt email, apologizing for her actions and expressing her desire to make amends. To her surprise, they agreed to meet with her, though their tone was cautious. During their conversation, Karen learned about the emotional and psychological impact incidents like hers could have on animals, particularly horses trained for ceremonies. The organization suggested she volunteer at a local stable to better understand how to care for these majestic creatures and perhaps find a way to give back meaningfully. Karen eagerly accepted the opportunity, seeing it as a chance to prove she was serious about changing. Every weekend, she drove to the countryside where the stable was located, donning simple clothes and rubber boots, a far cry from her usual designer outfits. At first, the staff treated her with suspicion, keeping a close eye on her every move. But as weeks passed, they noticed her dedication. She arrived early, stayed late, and threw herself into tasks like grooming the horses, cleaning stalls, and preparing feed. For someone who had never worked with animals before, Karen's progress was remarkable, but it didn't come without challenges. One particular moment stood out during her time at the stable. A young horse named Luna, known for being skittish around strangers, refused to let Karen near her. No matter how gently Karen approached or how softly she spoke, Luna would shy away, her ears flattening defensively. It was frustrating, but instead of giving up, Karen spent hours sitting quietly near Luna's stall, reading aloud or simply talking about her day. Slowly, Luna began to trust her, eventually allowing Karen to brush her mane and even lead her on short walks. This small victory brought tears to Karen's eyes. It wasn't just a sign of progress, it felt like forgiveness. Word of Karen's efforts began to spread, albeit cautiously. Local news outlets picked up on her story, highlighting her volunteer work as a potential step toward redemption. Some praised her willingness to confront her mistakes head-on, while others remained skeptical, accusing her of using charity work as a PR stunt. Online debates raged on, with commenters dissecting every detail of her transformation. Is she really sorry, or is this just damage control? One post read. Another argued, maybe people deserve a second chance, but we shouldn't forget what she did. Despite the mixed reactions, Karen pressed on. She started attending workshops on cultural sensitivity and participated in community service projects aimed at educating tourists about respecting local customs. These experiences opened her eyes to perspectives she'd never considered before, challenging her ingrained sense of entitlement. In therapy, she began unpacking the roots of her behavior, her need for attention, her impatience, and her inability to consider the feelings of others. While the process was painful, it also gave her hope. For the first time in months, she felt like she was moving forward rather than running in circles. But redemption isn't something easily earned, especially when your misdeeds are etched into the collective memory of millions. As Karen looked in the mirror each morning, she saw not just the person she had become, but also the shadow of the woman she used to be. Whether the world would ever truly forgive her remained uncertain. But one thing was clear. Karen was determined to live differently, for herself, for Luna, and for anyone else whose life she might touch in the future. Karen's attempts to rebuild her life and reputation became a delicate balancing act between genuine effort and public perception. While she poured her energy into volunteering at the stable and participating in cultural sensitivity programs, the world remained divided on whether her actions were truly sincere or merely a calculated attempt to salvage her image. Every step forward seemed to be met with equal parts praise and skepticism, leaving her constantly second-guessing herself. At the stable, Karen continued to bond with Luna, the once skittish horse that had become her unlikely companion. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing week, and Karen found solace in the quiet moments they shared. She learned to read Luna's body language, understanding when she was relaxed or anxious, and adjusted her approach accordingly. One day, as she led Luna through a scenic trail near the countryside, Karen felt an overwhelming sense of peace, a feeling she hadn't experienced since before the incident. For the first time, she realized that redemption wasn't just about proving herself to others. It was about finding inner healing too. Word of her progress spread beyond the local community. A journalist from a prominent magazine visited the stable to write a feature story about Karen's journey, capturing both her struggles and her growth. The article included photos of her working with Luna, along with quotes from the stable staff who acknowledged her dedication. "She's come a long way," one worker said. "It's clear she cares about these animals now." The piece struck a chord with readers, sparking conversations about forgiveness and personal transformation. Some praised Karen for taking accountability, while others dismissed her efforts as insufficient. Comment sections erupted with heated debates. "Good for her for trying," one person wrote, while another countered, "An apology doesn't erase what she did." Encouraged by the positive feedback, Karen decided to take her redemption efforts a step further. She partnered with the Animal Welfare Organization to launch an educational campaign aimed at tourists visiting iconic landmarks like Buckingham Palace. The initiative focused on promoting respect for ceremonial traditions and the animals involved, using her own story as a cautionary tale. Flyers, videos, and social media posts emphasized the importance of patience, empathy, and mindfulness during travel. Though it was uncomfortable for Karen to relive her mistake publicly, she knew it could help prevent similar incidents in the future. Her involvement in the campaign drew mixed reactions. Supporters applauded her willingness to turn her failure into something constructive, calling it a bold and courageous move. Critics, however, accused her of exploiting her notoriety for attention, arguing that no amount of volunteer work could undo the harm she caused. Even some members of the Royal Guard community expressed ambivalence, acknowledging her efforts but questioning whether they were enough to earn forgiveness. Despite the criticism, Karen remained committed to her cause. She began speaking at schools and community centers, sharing her story with groups of all ages. Her talks weren't polished or rehearsed. They were raw and honest, filled with moments of vulnerability as she described the shame and regret she felt after the incident. "I made a terrible mistake," she would say, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But I'm learning from it, and I hope my experience can remind others to think twice before acting out of frustration or entitlement." Her words resonated with many, particularly young people who admired her courage in facing the consequences of her actions. Still, there were days when the weight of public scrutiny felt unbearable. Anonymous trolls continued to harass her online, posting cruel memes and mocking her attempts at redemption. Friends suggested she ignore them, but the negativity lingered in the back of her mind, making it hard to focus on her goals. Therapy sessions helped her navigate these emotions, teaching her how to separate constructive criticism from baseless attacks. Slowly but surely, Karen learned to let go of what she couldn't control and focus instead on the things she could change. By the end of her first year post-incident, Karen had accomplished more than she ever thought possible. She had formed meaningful connections with people and animals alike, gained a deeper understanding of responsibility, and inspired others to reflect on their own behaviors. Yet, even as she celebrated these milestones, she knew the scars of her past would always remain, a reminder of the lessons she had learned and the work still left to do. Redemption, she realized, wasn't a destination. It was a lifelong journey. Months turned into years, and Karen's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The once infamous tourist who had thrown a rock at a Royal Guards horse was now known for something entirely different: her tireless advocacy for animal welfare and cultural respect. While the world hadn't forgotten her mistake, many began to see her as proof that people can change, if they're willing to put in the work. For Karen, This realization came with both relief and humility. She knew she couldn't erase the past, but she could shape her future and hopefully inspire others to do the same. Karen's volunteer work at the stable became a cornerstone of her new identity. Luna, the horse that had taught her so much about trust and patience, remained her closest companion. Together, they participated in local events designed to educate the public about caring for animals. At one such event, Karen stood nervously in front of a crowd of families and children, holding Luna's reins as she recounted her story. "This horse changed my life," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "She showed me what it means to earn trust, not just from others, but from myself." The audience listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and admiration. Parents whispered to their kids, pointing out how far Karen had come since that fateful day at Buckingham Palace. Her partnership with the animal welfare organization also flourished. What started as a small campaign aimed at tourists grew into a nationwide initiative, complete with workshops, school programs, and even a documentary featuring Karen's journey. The film highlighted not only her misstep, but also her determination to make amends. Critics initially dismissed it as self-serving, but audiences responded positively, praising its honesty and message of accountability. One viewer commented online, "It's not about forgetting what she did. It's about learning from it. If she can turn her life around, maybe we can too." Despite these achievements, Karen faced reminders of her past almost daily. Some people still recognized her on the street, whispering behind their hands or giving her disapproving looks. Occasionally, someone would approach her to share their thoughts, some supportive, others critical. Once, a man stopped her outside a cafe, his tone sharp. "You think you're forgiven just because you clean stalls now?" he asked. Karen took a deep breath before responding. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said calmly. "But I hope my actions today show that I'm trying to be better." The man walked away without another word, leaving Karen shaken but resolute. Over time, however, those moments became less frequent. As the years passed, the headlines faded, and Karen's name no longer sparked immediate recognition. She moved to a quieter town, where she continued her advocacy work while embracing a simpler life. Her mornings began with walks through the countryside, often accompanied by Luna. Neighbors who didn't know her history welcomed her warmly, appreciating her kindness and dedication to the community. It was a stark contrast to the isolation she'd endured in the aftermath of the incident, and Karen cherished every moment of it. Looking back, Karen realized how much she had grown, not just as a person, but as someone capable of empathy and resilience. Therapy had helped her confront the roots of her behavior, teaching her to channel her frustrations constructively rather than lashing out impulsively. She often reflected on the chaos she had caused at Buckingham Palace, remembering the fear in the horse's eyes and the anger in the crowd's voices. Those memories served as a constant reminder of the importance of respecting boundaries, whether they belonged to people, animals, or traditions. As for the royal guard whose duty she had disrupted, Karen occasionally thought about him. Though she never met him again, she hoped he knew how deeply sorry she was. In interviews, she sometimes mentioned him, expressing gratitude for his professionalism in handling the situation. "He represented everything I wasn't that day," she once said. "Grace under pressure, dignity, and respect. I'll always admire him for that." In the end, Karen's story became more than just a cautionary tale. It was a testament to the power of accountability and growth. Not everyone forgave her, and some scars remained. But she had learned that redemption isn't about erasing mistakes. It's about using them as stepping stones toward becoming a better version of yourself. And though the road ahead would always hold challenges, Karen faced it with a quiet confidence, knowing she had already overcome the hardest part, facing herself.